Hi everyone. Today I'm going to show you some techniques that I use to paint with distress ink on photo quality paper. This is just one example, and I've used one of my favorite stamps. Actually, it's one from a series of stamps by Tim Holtz called the Glorious Stamps. This one's Glorious Gatherings. I'm using a photo quality paper today. This is my preferred brand. It's Kirkland from Costco. Comes in 8.5 by 11 sheets. It actually comes in various sizes, but that's how I buy it. And I cut it into fourths, so we come out with an A2 size or 4.25 by 5.5. I have Archival ink, which is a solvent in the color coffee, and I'm using that Glorious Gatherings stamp, the very large one. Of course, I won't use the entire stamp on that very small panel, but I will certainly use a portion of it. This is Tim Holtz's stamping platform. I really enjoy this one. I also make sure I double check to see that I've got the right setting on. That lid comes up and can flip around. Right now it's set to rubber stamp, which is what this Glorious Gathering stamp is, so we're all set. I did already pre-stamp using, again, the coffee archival ink, and it's a solvent ink, so when I add water or watercolor ink to this, it's not going to run. That image that I've stamped is going to stay nice and crisp. And I've used the brown because there's some brown branches in this image, and I won't have to paint over them. They'll come out looking very nice. The pen I'm using is a water chamber pen, so it has water right in the chamber. It can be squeezed out, and I don't have to dip any brushes into water, which is something that you're certainly welcome to do. You do whatever you wish. I'm just pointing out that this is a brush that has water in it. And I'm using 8 inks today. The 4 greens or green to gold is forest moss. We have mowed lawn, crushed olive, fossilized amber, and in the blue purples I've got stormy sky, shaded lilac, seedless preserves, and dusty concord. And so I'm going to start with shaded lilac, and I'm going to go straight for the larger image in the midst of this glorious gatherings bouquet. And it could be a pine cone. I will color it as though it is a succulent, so in some kind of a really neat green or purple. And in this case, I'm going to color it using 2 colors of purple. I first added several drops of water to the ink that I smushed down on my craft sheet, and that's because this ink is highly pigmented, and I want to be sure that while the color goes on and it's very nice and so on, I don't want that color to cover up any of the lines so that I can't see them, and I particularly don't want the ink covering up the shading on the image. So the artist has very kindly given some great hints about where shading should go, which will be the darker color when I get to it. And those are the lines that are done. If you're familiar with cross hatching, it's the same idea, but this is not cross hatches. This is just simply lines put together, and they indicate where the shadows would be on the image. So my first step is to go over the entire image and really just cover that image with this nice light version of the shaded lilac. And that, as I say, I've squirted out a little bit of the water onto the ink that I smushed onto my craft sheet, so it gives it a nice light, beautiful purple color. So it's a background color. And I happen to have got myself just enough. I'm so frugal, I really try to use up every last drop. You'll see me wipe off the occasional leftover drops of ink, but where I can, I try to use them up. So I'm just sort of doing a visual to make sure I've covered the entire portion of the image that I want to cover, which is this succulent in the very center. And I always have a paper towel handy, and so that's used not only to clean up the residual ink and drops of water on my craft mat, but also to squeeze that pen, get some water flowing through it, and just rub it around on the paper to clean it out. So now I'm going to my next shade, which will be the darkest shade, and I'm going to use Seedless Preserves. And again, you can see that leaves some very dark drops of ink. And if I just touch those dark drops onto the napkin, you'll see that it's very dark without any water. So in this case, because it's such a dark color, and although I want it for shading, I still don't want it to overwhelm. So I've added probably 5 or 6 drops to that little smush that I did. It's best to test it out and be very cautious when you first go in. And what I'm doing is touching this darker ink, the Seedless Preserve, back onto the same portion of the image, except I'm only touching it where the artist has put those shade marks. So again, I'm allowing the artist to guide me here. It makes the process relatively painless. I try not to worry about shading and all that kind of thing, but it certainly does make a difference. And you'll see that I typically start with the lighter of colors. I go in second with the dark or darker colors, and at the very end I will add light again if necessary. So once I'm done this particular image, I'm going to go on to the next ones, and I will speed up this video several times because I don't think it's really worth your time to go through every single image, because I think the technique is quite straightforward, and really it comes down to deciding what you want as a color palette, where you want to drop the colors, and then going back in, as you will see at the end when I slow back down to our regular pace. I will then show you how I drop in the lightness with a white pen. So I'm going to be quiet now and just let you watch this, and in a moment it will speed up. So we've brought it back down to regular speed. I'm just finishing up a pine cone. One of the larger pine cones that's on this piece of the image. I chose to do it in the Stormy Sky color, which might seem a little bit unusual because it's kind of a blue, but it's a blue-gray, and I've seen some pine cones that have kind of a blue-gray appearance, probably have been on the tree for quite some time, but it's an interesting color, and I don't pay too much attention to the botany texts or encyclopedias when it comes to painting plant life, or anything for that matter. I really just do what I feel comfortable doing. So this is crushed olive that I'm using, and I'm just going in to finish off a couple of different pieces of plant life that are in this particular image. I actually have a copy of the stamp, or the back side of the stamp sitting next to me as a reference point. And ordinarily, if I'm just working on my own, not during a tutorial because I've got too many things on my mind while I'm doing it, but ordinarily I will refer back to that image just to be clear on what it is that's being depicted. Although, again, it probably doesn't matter a heck of a lot. At the end of the day, it's just a very beautiful mix of colors, and you've got the general gist of the image. For most people, that's quite enough. So I've cleared away the distress inks. I've taken out my Sakura, which is Sakura. It's a white gel pen by a company called Sakura. I often have three of them. I buy them in threes. And as you'll see, the first one isn't going to give me any ink. It probably has a little bit of something stuck on the nib, so or the roller ball. I just grab Plan B, I grab my next Sakura pen, which is sitting right next to me. And to highlight, I'm really just going down where there would ordinarily be shadows and maybe just a bit of light, because of course there's no shadows without light. So I've gone down the center of a couple of those pine stems. I've flicked out a few times where the needles would be, and it really is more about an indication of where light would be. If you're a real perfectionist and you want everything to look exactly as it would, then most definitely you could have an image next to you and use that as a reference point. I don't do that very much. I pretty much allow my eye to decide where the light should be or additional light needs to hit. And when it comes to that center image that I began with, again, it's fairly the artist has done a good job. It's fairly simple to see where the light should hit because it's where the white parts are. I don't want to cover everything that I did in that very nice shaded lilac at the very beginning with white, but occasionally I will go back and drop in a little bit of white where there needs to be some definition, or where I think that white is going to draw the eye to an area where we know that light would hit. So ordinarily, many of you who are artists are going to know this already. If it's something dark, it's going to recede, and light makes things move forward. So we want to keep that in mind as well. It's practice and watching other people work and really looking at pictures, I guess, through another frame, and that is sort of eyeing where are the shadows and where is the light. And I've done a lot of that most of my life, so I'm certainly not you know, a, an expert when it comes again to shadow and light, but it's something that's always interested me, and I have just come through experience to realize that adding the little bits of light at the end really do, or at some point in the process, I just find it easier at the end, just make that little bit extra definition. It really helps things pop, makes the colors quite a bit more vibrant as well. And again, it's a personal preference. If you didn't want to do that at all, that's just fine. And some people like to have a whole lot more white on there than I might. So that really becomes a matter of personal taste. So I'm not going to go through too much of it more. Actually, as I'm working on it, I'm seeing that it is coming together very nicely, and that once it has a sentiment on it and is mounted in some way, if I'm going to be using it as a card, or I suppose it could be also framed, used in some kind of a project, then I stop. So you'll see in a couple of moments here that I stop and decide that that's it for me. And it's the old question, when do you stop? So entirely up to you, of course, and if you needed to, you could also come back in with more ink. But there's my completed piece for today. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm going to leave you with a few seconds of the still of that image so that you can take that in a bit. Thanks again for joining me.